This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
Indie Live Radio.
You're listening to Indie Live Radio, Pensioners for Independence podcast. This is Marlene Halliday, just going to give you a little bit of an intro to this week's podcast. And this week we're featuring Mary McCabe. Mary McCabe is a long-time campaigner for independence. Mary's been campaigning for independence for decades, from when it was just a great idea, but only in the minds of a few people, and to be honest, the rest of us thought, oh, it'll never happen, even if we thought it was possible for it to happen. But she was there, and she's been campaigning from back then till right up till now. She's a very active member of Greater Glasgow Pensioners for Independence group. If you've been down on Argyll Street in Glasgow midday on a Thursday, you probably walk past Mary, because she's there most weeks with her gang of stalwart campaigners at the Pensioners for Independence stall. And these days, in the middle of COVID pandemic, she's come up with a new way, a socially distanced way to run a campaign stall. She was very, very active during the 2014 campaign, of course, and after that, she wrote a book, which is called Two Closes and a Referendum. So today you're going to hear Val Gold and I talking to Mary, just getting her to reminisce a bit, tell us what it was like way back then. She got up to some high jinks, I'll tell you. And later on we talked to her about what made her sit down and write the book Two Closes and a Referendum. I'm sure you're going to enjoy this.
Good morning and welcome to Indie Live Radio, where it's an all-female takeover this morning. So I'm here, this is Val here in the studio with Marlene.
Hi.
And we've got a guest. We're delighted to have a guest here in our studio today, Mary McCabe.
Hello.
Mary McCabe is on the board of Scottish Independence Convention. She's a long-time activist for independence in the SNP and also co-convener nationally of Pensioners for Independence. I'm sure there's a few other things I could add there, Mary. So in a minute I'm going to pass over to Marlene, who's going to talk to Mary about all sorts of interesting topics. Before we start our discussion though, we're going to have like a little bit of music there, and among Mary's great achievements is she founded a group called the Pensioners for Indie Warblers, which is a musical group that goes out and takes the indie message live out to older people, which is obviously as a target group, in a soft way, not through speeches or workshops or leaflets, but through music, song and entertainment, and just generally having a good time. And I was involved in it in the past, maybe we'll be able to in the future again. So is Marlene, who plays the fiddle. And we were part of the Warblers doing a Burns programme in January, which was great, and there was also a summer repertoire, and Mary is currently involved in doing the Christmas shows in various sheltered housing complexes and so on. And one of the star parts of the show is Mary doing Eartha Kitt's Santa Baby. Unfortunately, she's not going to do it live on air for you. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not sure, and she hasn't got her red feather boa with her today. But I was saying that we're very delighted to have Mary McCabe, and I told you a little bit about Mary on previously. So here's Marlene to tell you a bit more about Mary.
I'm going to start insisting she calls me Marlena soon.
Oh yes.
So yeah, Mary, it's great to have you. It's great to have you here. I know you've been into Indie Live Radio on a previous occasion, at least once, maybe more than that. So I was just thinking, well, I met you. It's nearly 2 years ago. It'd be 2 years ago, kind of February, March. That was the first time I went along to a Glasgow Pensioners for Indie meeting. So I was at the point where I thought, oh, Mrs. May kept saying now's not the time, and I thought, I must get a bit more active this time. And being the age I am, which we'll just leave it at plus 65, I thought, okay, that would be that age group. They're the ones who don't vote yet, or only a quarter of us voted yes in 2014, so it seemed to make sense if I was going to try and have some, relevant and useful input to go with that age group. So I looked up Pensioners for Independence, walked into a room, and you were there. So I think it was the basement of the Yes Bar. I think was that one.
Yes, we met there when we started to grow in numbers. At first we used to meet in a wee cafe round a table, but then that grew too small for us.
Yeah.
And so we then moved to the Yes Bar, the basement, because we could get that for free.
I mean, I remember that first meeting, because Pensions for Indy has quite a high public profile. You know, it wasn't, I'd heard of them, so I was expecting there to be more people. I think there was about 8 or 9 at that meeting. But that was 2 years ago, and actually we go to meetings now in Glasgow, and there's 20, 30 people.
Yes,
So tell us a bit about how the Pensioners for Indy got started up. I mean, was it during the referendum or a little bit after?
It was a little bit after. It was actually Peter Swain who started it.
Right, over in Edinburgh.
Yes, he's not as involved now, but he was the one who kick-started it, and at that point I wasn't involved either. I only, at the time I came along, were a wee group round a cafe. And we didn't really do very much. We just met once a month. But then when the cafe wasn't suitable for us, we then moved to the Yes Bar, and we stayed there for a while, but the acoustics weren't as good there.
And it wasn't very good for accessibility.
It wasn't good for accessibility, and quite a few pensioners are a bit hard of hearing. So that's why we now meet in the basement of the Bacchus Bar, and that's fine. It's big.
We're very fond of meeting in bars.
Yes,
it's great.
Oh, it's really good.
So you were saying at that point nothing much. Well, obviously people were meeting once a month, but nothing much was happening. But well, I suspect the minute you got involved, Mary, probably things start happening, because if there's one thing I've learned about Mary McCabe, folks, is she gets things done. Sometimes I think, have we thought about that? Have we thought about that? And I'm quite good at doing the have we thought about that stuff, but then sometimes I forget to act. Mary never forgets to act. And I mean, you organised that talk with Christina McKelvey. That was a public talk.
That's right. We had Christina McKelvey come along and talk to us. It was very successful. And we put that out to the whole. I mean, when I say we meet in a bar, that's the Glasgow group.
Yes, the Glasgow
group. But of course there are groups all over the place.
Yes.
And for the Christina McKelvey meeting, we also got quite a lot coming over from the Edinburgh and Lothians group. The two most active groups are the Greater Glasgow group and the Edinburgh and Lothians group. Though that's maybe unfair, because actually the Dumfries and Galloway group, I believe, are very, very active. But because they're a wee bit further away from us, we don't necessarily know all they get up to. But I know they've got a big white van that they take to all the rallies with all their stuff, and they seem very active. Well, they have
actually. I keep in touch with them via Facebook and occasional email with them, and they are very active, and they've got a really good band. Actually, that's a point Mary's just raised about that there are other groups, and I mean Glasgow, Greater Glasgow, and then Edinburgh, Lothians. There have been longest groups, but there's groups now in Fife. Stirling's just Perth. Hopefully going to start up. There's a group in Perth. There's Selkirk, that's a new group, and also down in Ayr. And there always was a group in Aberdeen, and we think it's not so active now, but we should try and help them get going again.
I think it was Aberdeenshire rather than Aberdeen City, which means that travel can be a difficulty. Yeah. We've got individuals in Shetland and Orkney, and in fact there are. The membership at the moment nationally is about 800, and that's all over the country.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you were up at Aberdeen at the March earlier in the year, and you got chatting to a chap from Brechin, and he's now he's involved running the Brechin Yes Hub, which is called, I really like this, it's called the Blether Inn.
Oh, very
it's great.
Oh,
it's really good. But he's been in touch with us, both showing us what leaflets he's come up with, and he's now got our leaflets. So that's another thing that's going on this year.
Fife is quite active too. Kirkcaldy. I've got a hub several times a week. Yeah.
And so one of the other things we've been doing, we've got a national group that kind of coordinates. It's not the boss. It's definitely not the boss. But Mary and I are both in it, and it coordinates. It just does a bit of coordinating, so that it keeps groups in touch with one another. They can send person to the meetings, and one of the big things that's happened this year is us getting going with 2 new leaflets that are specific for what we hope will do to try and persuade, older folk round to yes. So there's one that focuses on, well, it does focus on pensions, but what it does is it relates what the pension is, which isn't very high in terms of developed countries. British state pension is pretty low, but it relates that to the strength of the Scottish economy. So it links it to. Yes. It's a really good leaflet. Jim Stamper of our group came up with it, and the other one is about generations, and it's just trying to get people to think that. Most of the younger generation support independence. Most of the grannies and granddads don't support independence, and it's just trying to kind of encourage people to talk through that and why, and because there are concerns on both sides, and they're valid concerns. Yes. I'm not saying that the older no voters' concerns are not valid; they are. But there would be good to actually get that intergenerational chat going. So that gives us a bit of a background. But what do you think yourself about what's going to, convince more older folk to yes?
Well, I think in some senses we're pushing at an open door, because most older people nowadays belong to the baby boomer generation.
That's us.
And that's us. And we were not a conservative generation at all. We were the ones that shocked our parents. We dropped in, dropped out, turned off, turned on, whatever. And I think people still have this inside them. We just have to find the baby boomer core behind the grey hair. Because it's in there. It's in there. Yeah. And we just have to awaken it.
It's a good point.
It's a really good point, yeah.
And I mean, I don't want to be depressive. I certainly don't want to be ageist at my age, but I think there is a difference probably between the baby boomers, the people who were teenagers in the 60s and 70s, and the older generation who lived through the war or the 1930s and so on. 50s. I think they have a different attitude to change, probably.
I think they probably have more of a sense of loyalty to Great Britain,
probably.
And actually, I wouldn't. We're not. Who's going to knock that? I mean, loyalty is a good kind of quality to have. It's just to try and get people to think through. Well, is that valid any longer?
It's to an extent it is, I suppose, fear of the future. I mean, people say at the moment there's been so much talk about borders, more to do with Northern Ireland than Scotland. Hard borders, soft borders, borders in the Irish Sea, borders across the island of Ireland, and so on. And but to me, this is not such a big issue if you just look a wee bit beyond the British Isles, because you've got Norway and you've got Sweden. Now, Norway is an associate member of the EU and it's a full member of NATO. Sweden is an associate member of NATO and a full member of the EU. They've got no visible border at all. They wander backwards and forwards. They don't show passports. They don't do anything. I don't myself know how all the bureaucracy works this, but they work it, and they could work it for us as well.
Of course, just to play devil's advocate a bit, the thing is both of them are in the single market. Norway's not in the customs union, but they are in the single because they're in EFTA.
Market, that's right.
And
that's a big issue,
that makes that possible. That makes that kind of possible. If England was that looks like they'll be definitely out the single market, then that makes it a bit more problematic. But actually, if it's possible for Ireland, it's blooming well possible for England and Scotland.
If you look beyond Europe, it's possible elsewhere as well, because Australia has got different immigration policies for its cities compared to its outback, which desperately needs people.
I didn't know that.
So you can immigrate much more easily into the outback or whatever they call it in Australia than you can into places like Sydney, where they're overpopulated. And Alberta has got a different immigration policy.
Yes, the Canadian provinces have their own.
So it's actually very easy, because all you need to do is be everybody knows where you're registered to work or where you're going to be taxed. So if you make if you want to be restrictive on immigrants going from Scotland into England, you just need to say they can only work in Scotland and not work in England. And okay, they can toddle down to England to see the views or whatever, but their work has to be based, and therefore their home would be.
Oh, Mary, you're funny.
Actually, if they're in Scotland, they'll mostly want to see the views in Scotland.
Exactly, I think so, but we'll let them bring their friends up. So let's talk a bit about the Warblers. Because I remember I was at one of the meetings in Glasgow, and I think Alan Logue, who's our convener of the Glasgow group, I know he was sort of saying, well, it'd be good if we, had an entertainment group. And then I think about a week later, I get an email from you, which you'd sent out.
It was Alan put the idea into my head.
And you were just up and running with it. So tell us a bit more about that.
Right. Well, we're actually a bit of a movable feast because I think we've had about a dozen or 13, that's not a very lucky number, but okay, 13 people who've kind of signed up to the Warblers, but we never are quite sure how many are going to be at a performance, never mind a rehearsal, because pensioners are terrible for going off in 5-week holidays and going off looking after grandchildren at the drop of a hat.
And in my case, injuring my leg and going on, I can't come.
Well, there was the leg as well.
Like Val said earlier, the whole kind of thinking behind the Warblers was just, to have a bit of a presence.
Yes.
I know the ones that I did earlier in the year, we were in, they weren't residential homes, but they were sheltered housing.
Yes, sheltered housing, and also lunch clubs.
Yes, lunch clubs. And so the idea is just have a bit of a presence there. We're not going in with loads of pensioners or independence leaflets, but actually just chatting to people. And I mean, I had some really interesting chats with folk.
Yes.
I mean, some of them were pro-indie, some of them were going, nah, not going to blah, blah, not going to do that. I mean, it is interesting, but do you think it's been successful?
I think it has. The thing we've got to think of now, because of the independence referendum and everything that's happened since, and the whole Brexit thing and everything, people are very polarised now. So most people who take much interest in politics either have made up their minds either for or against. The people we've got to try and bring into the fold are the soft no and yes people who are not that interested in politics primarily. They've got more important things in their lives.
But they will vote.
Vote. And so we want to introduce them. They maybe don't have a very political group of friends, so they very rarely meet activists of any kind, and they maybe think realise that we're a bit strange, yes.
Well, it's interesting because last week Val and I, actually on a Friday after the election, Val and I were here for a whole 2 hours talking to Robin McAlpine of Commonweal, and he used this, I thought was very interesting phrase.
That was just came into my mind, right? I know what you're going to say.
That's good.
Yeah.
He said he had this phrase, indie curious. And that's the folk that we need to get to.
Yes.
It's a bit similar to you saying, and other folk saying soft, undecided. But it's a very good phrase, isn't it? It's like you could get into a conversation.
It's just what I was thinking as well when Mary said that.
Yes,
yeah.
and the thing you've got to remember is these people are not primarily interested in politics. They're not going to go and read political columns in newspapers, read political blogs. They're not going to necessarily even read leaflets. But if in the course of other things they get talking to you, they get to know you, then that's when you can show them that we don't all have 3 heads and antennae.
So are we going to have another wee bit of music?
My goodness, you're just reading my mind here,
well,
Marlene.
We are
this
as
is
one.
amazing.
We are as one, really.
I was just going to say that, but I didn't want to interrupt you in full flow. So, Mary...
Well, this has got a line in it, what do you do when minority means you? And that's exactly the situation we find ourselves in Scotland. Yeah. We're a minority, a rapidly diverging political minority within the UK. And what do you do? I mean, democracy fails you, basically, if it's always the same minority voting differently.
So welcome back to Indie Live Radio with Marlene, Mary and Val. And... you were before that little intro, you heard the Corries, the Pogues, and the sensational Alex Harvey Band. So we're back here now. We were talking to Doug Daniel from Aberdeen, and we're back now talking to Mary McCabe. And we're enjoying some mince pies.
Yes, I'm just sitting here trying to get rid of the last crumb of the mince pie with the coffee. Mary's being very good. She's not having a mince pie.
You're putting us to shame.
I
Mary.
know.
Wait till Christmas.
But I know. Whereas Kevin and me and Val are munching away here. So, going back to yourself, actually, Mary, one of the things, because I remember at one point, because you and I didn't know each other kind of that well. We begin meetings and things. But meetings are very particular, aren't they?
Yes.
And I sort of said, how about meeting up for a cup of coffee? And I think that was the day we went to the Modern Art Gallery in
That's
Glasgow.
right.
And that was when I found out that you, I knew you'd been a writer, and actually I'd read some of the articles you've written, and I thought, oh, this woman's good. This woman's a good, that knows how to write. And then on that kind of chat we were meeting up, I discovered that you'd written, it may be more than one book now, but at that point you'd written this book, and it's called Two Closes and a Referendum.
That's right.
And I've now got it on my Kindle. I'm not finished it yet, but I've got it on my Kindle. So tell us a bit about where that came from.
Well, that obviously came from the independence referendum. I had already written 4 books on various subjects and under different conditions, but this was the first one that was overtly political, really, but it's still a novel. I was an activist, of course, during 2013, 2014, didn't get time to write anything, but after the independence referendum was over, I thought I would bring together my experiences as an activist, which largely was being in Glasgow, running up and down tenement closes. And I thought about people up closes. You get different kinds of closes. You get closes that are quite posh and full of owner-occupiers. You get closes which are not posh at all. And all the people who live up them, sometimes they know each other quite well. Sometimes they don't know each other at all, just passing the stair. They mirror the whole diversity of Glasgow. And I thought, what if I take 2 closes and these people with their human drama and everything in different parts of the East End, which is where I come from. One of them owner-occupied close, one of them in a housing scheme. And some of these people heavily involved in the campaign, some of them not involved at all, some of them even not voting. But they've all got their human drama and how they interrelate to the actual campaign on both sides. And I brought in no activists as well as yes activists.
Of
because
course,
I wanted,
yes, of course.
And I wanted to reflect the diversity, so I've reflected it in terms of ethnicity, sexuality, or tried to anyway. Probably you don't get actually quite as diverse people up the one close, but and age, of course. I've brought in quite a lot of teenagers and also old people, and just how they're related to the independence referendum
that's fantastic.
as a peripheral part of they've all got their own dramas involving runawaying and all sorts of things like that. And architecture I brought in as well, because when you're running up and down closes and doing canvassing, you see an awful lot of different kinds of architecture. You see the big grand Victorian tenements, you see the falling down type places, and foreigner blocks where quite often at night you're tripping over the stones because you've got to find your way around the back to get to the front door. And you've got high flats as well. And at that time the Red Road flats in Glasgow were on the brink of coming down, so I'll bring them in quite a bit as well. So it mixes activism in the ref and architecture and human drama.
Well, that just sounds... I mean, when I heard the title, I thought, wow, that's quite a good way of talking about it. And because, well, it was this more kind of theory came in after the referendum. Suddenly, I mean, I was hearing, on media about how divisive the referendum had been, and families were kind of split and friends didn't talk to one another. And I thought, wow, that wasn't my experience.
No.
My experience was I just, on a bus, in a taxi, whatever, in a shop or a bus queue, standing talking. A complete stranger would say, "Have you decided how you're going to vote yet?" or I'd ask, and suddenly you're in a conversation, and there's a lady gets on the same bus stop as me that I used at the time. And I know she was just, when we get on the same bus stop, she's on her way home after an early morning cleaning job. And she was saying, "No, I haven't made up my mind yet. Well, I'm worried about the currency." question. And we're sitting here having this conversation about currency on the number 16
Yes.
bus. So do you you pick up on that theme at
Well,
all?
what I thought about this divisive thing, well, I mean, part of it, of course, is unionist propaganda
Yes, I know,
trying to
yeah.
stop us having another independence referendum. But I heard one theory which I thought was quite valid. It said that the yes people actually saw the independence referendum as a happy time, people having conversations, people getting more politicised, people getting not apathetic about politics and so on. But the no side had a very different experience. The no activists saw it as a pessimistic thing because they were all the time talking down the place and saying we're too wee, too poor, too stupid,
Can I
and so on.
interrupt you for 1 second, just to say, Mary, that's a very interesting thing there. That talking about music.
Mm-hmm.
I was at a meeting at one. It was like a talk actually, and it was at the Glasgow University. They've got like a department now. I don't know if it's a department, but they've got a bit all about political music. Political
Yeah, I've heard
song.
about that.
And there's a Janie Buchan archive, I think.
Yep.
And that's what this meeting was about. And they actually did a wee talk on the music that came out of the NDF.
Yeah.
And the number of songs. And they went,
Yeah.
how many songs do you think were written about the yes side, and how many songs do you think were written about the no side? And it was unbelievable. I can't remember the exact figures, but I think the number of songs that was written from the yes side was like over 100, and the number of songs that was written from the no side was like 2 or 3 or something. It was unbelievable. That sort of flowering of creativity with the whole National Collective.
The National Collective, of course, as soon as they set themselves up, they basically laid claim to the cultural side of the referendum, and that was a yes side. The no side had very little culture to it, as far as I could see at all. And in my unbiased way, and also they had a more pessimistic experience because they were always trying to portray the bad part of Scotland and why we weren't able to do it. So they had a different experience, and when they think back, it was a sad experience for them. It was a divisive experience, and some of them are quite genuine, although they also are wanting to put about that another referendum would be even more divisive for political reasons.
I mean, let's face it, by their very definition, a referendum is divisive because it divides you into one or the other.
So are elections.
Absolutely, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Well, the thing I got about the Tory thing, Ruth Davidson and also later after her, their whole thing was no to India Ref 2. Now, what is that about? That's about my only policy that I'm putting around is denying my fellow citizens a say in their own future. And what occurred to me was the Tories putting this about, why don't they just want to abolish elections? And maybe they actually do, because I think if the Tories had always been around, working men would never have got the vote, not even, and never mind women. And so they're putting about the yawn factor. It's such a chore to walk across the road to your school and put a box across in a box. Don't bother about that. Don't bother your pretty little heads about that. You leave the politics up to the experts,
Mary,
and go and watch your reality TV.
I was on the gate of the polling station for a couple of stints on last Thursday there, and it was so. I found it quite moving in a way. There was a couple of wee old ladies and men who probably, in all honesty, should have had a postal vote, but they could hardly walk up the street, and they were tottering in to vote, and I just thought it was amazing.
Yes.
Plus, I have never seen so many young folk load, and not just on their own, but groups of young lassies, groups of young folk, maybe 4 or 5 together, all going in to vote, and these wee old folk kind of tottering in. Alistair Gray came in his wheelchair, and it was fantastic.
In the East End, there were people who
inspiring.
never even registered to vote before, and they were queuing to register to vote just for the independence referendum.
Just going back to that point about... of course, after the referendum, the Scottish Tory kind of... The one Scottish Tory policy is stop Indy Ref 2, and it's still there. I mean, the stuff that came through this time, there might have been Get Brexit done on the back page in small font, but mostly it was Stop Sturgeon.
And that horrible slogan, tell her again.
Yes, I know. But
horrible.
just to pick up on that, because again, this lecture I was at with John Curtis last night, I've got my notes, you see. So at the end, he was making 3 points about Scotland sort of going forward, and one of them was that even if the polls don't shift much, that was a late follow-on from something he'd said previously. He said, saying no isn't enough. It is not enough for Mr. Johnson or Jackson Carlaw, whoever, just to carry on saying no. That is not going to be enough. And what they have to come up with a campaign to persuade Scots of the benefits of the union. Basically he was saying, well, if they don't do that, if they carry on with the current one, which is just no, which has been there since now is not the time, 2018, then that's not going to win it for them when we have the second.
And he actually
referendum.
said that, didn't he? That's quite reassuring.
Yeah.
Yes.
He also said, I think you'll like this one as well, he also said, actually he referred to the hustings that he chaired that you were at.
Yeah, that was
So he said there was a very good question which was about...
Wasn't it my question? But he did. They started off with my question. I was
Oh,
fair
right,
chuffed.
very
Anyway,
good.
sorry, Marlene, I interrupted you. Just tell
I
me to
will have
shut up.
realised, folk, that Val had a question.
Sorry.
Anyway, I know I don't think this was your one,
Sorry.
but
No,
I
my
know
one
what your one was.
Mine
It was
one
very good.
Trident. It was Trident.
And the question was about. I may not have this exactly right because I was writing quite fast. But what would be sufficient evidence? Because people keep saying, "Well, there isn't." People don't want. Well, the unionists say people don't want.
What would it take to convince you?
What would it
mandate?
I
take?
remember
What
that
would
one,
be sufficient evidence for Indy 2,
Yeah,
for having Indy
I
2?
remember
And he
that.
said, well, basically, there was no answer from the Conservative.
Because there is no answer.
There was no answer. But he said that the other thing is that, of course, they keep referring back to this once in a generation. Now, so he said two things. He said, first of all, this is him speaking last night. I don't know what he said at the hustings. First of all, once in a generation was an encouragement to get the vote out. It was not a definitive statement of fact.
Exactly.
So that's him. That's him saying that. And he said, really, what you have to do is ask the question that should be being asked is what the SNP said as an encouragement to get the vote out 5 years ago a veto on what people are saying now?
Yes.
And I thought, well, I know there's folk in the Yes movement who keep saying, oh, John Curtis, he's a Tory. Actually, I don't know if he votes, how he votes.
I suspect he's a Green. I don't think he's a Tory. I think he's a Green.
But I think the point is it doesn't matter what he personally votes. He's a professional analyst, and he does not actually... Exactly. He does not come up with information that, he's not been cherry picking it. He tells you what the facts are, and I thought that was quite so. First of all, the once in a generation stuff was not a definitive statement of fact.
Right, ladies, can I just let you know, because I see you're away to launch another big chat, Mary. I'm just letting you know that we've got less than 2 minutes now.
All right.
Well, I think
we
you should.
I was going to read out Mary's letter in the Herald.
Yeah,
today.
I was just going to say, I had another letter in a week or two ago about this once in a generations thing.
Right,
in fact,
that's good. Tell us about that.
Pointing out
that just now.
Pointing
we'll read
out
your letter later.
in the big white paper thing that it came out of, it said, in their view, it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity. Now, that is a warning. It's not a pledge. No politician can pledge anything for a generation because they're not going to be around as a promise. It was a warning that it wouldn't come again.
It wasn't in the
manifesto. And so far, we're still struggling to get it
Yeah.
again, so who knows?
If you say it's a warning that it won't come again, I mean, that is kind. You could. Fair enough. I mean, you could take it from that it's not going to happen again. I mean,
they weren't promising themselves not to do it again. They said, in our view, it is an opportunity which will not.
Am I not right in thinking that it was said in interviews? It wasn't.
It was also
wasn't
said
in the
interviews.
Edinburgh Agreement. It wasn't
No.
in a manifesto.
No.
It wasn't in the white paper.
And you can't make a pledge for a generation because no politician is in for a generation.
I think we just have to accept that it's rather awkward for the Yes movement that it was said.
Yes.
Now, I mean, obviously they didn't think that wasn't in anyone's mind at the time, and no one picked up on it much at the time.
No.
It's only been since. But actually, I think how John Curtis, was talking about it last night. This was an encouragement to get the vote out, not a definitive statement of fact. I think that's good to stick with that one.
Okay. So Mary's letter says, we're used to unionists applying double standards when it comes to democracy. 45% is a resounding mandate for the Tories to take the UK, including Remain voting Scotland, out of the EU, but not enough for the SNP to ask for the Scots to have a bare choice in their future. Now, Kenny Wilson, that's the letter you were
Yeah.
replying to yesterday, letters December the 17th, asserts that, in quotes, in quotation, many who voted for the SNP in the general election are not independent supporters. And further down in the same letter, again in quotes, practically every person who would vote for independence is likely to have voted SNP last week, end quotes. Rubbish, says Mary. Even within my own circle, I know several people who not only support independence but campaigned for it and will do so again. But in this general election, rubbish. Even within my own circle, I know several people who not only support independence but campaigned for it and will do so again. Yet in this general election, they voted Labour in the vain hope of stopping this right-wing Tory government. Right, Mary, so I'll let you and Marlene have a wee talk about that.
You get letters in the Herald and the National.
Oh, yes,
You're obviously you're
yeah.
an
Well,
asset in that respect. So, was you happy with that? When you think that made the point?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, I just write. I do it strategically. Older people tend to still read newspapers, so I think it's quite important to put letters into the papers. Now, I do it strategically. In the Herald, I write if I've got a point to make about why independence is a good thing, often in response to something else that was appearing in the Herald, or maybe just, out my head. For the National, I don't write letters in support of independence because I reckon that's singing to the choir. So for the National, I write letters about the strategy of achieving independence. So that's the two things I do. And I don't think I've ever written a letter to the National that didn't get published. And the Herald certainly publishes 90-odd%. And I'm surprised if it's not in.
Yeah, I mean that particular point you were picking up on. I mean, I was listening to various things. I think that one of the Vandrew Mars guests came up with a statement, and then I heard it repeated elsewhere in the news. And it's this thing about, well, in response to an interviewer saying, well, SNP have obviously got, a massive mandate now in Scotland. And then what you hear is, well, more people voted against, more people didn't vote for the SNP than actually voted them. So it's not that much of a mandate. And I'm sitting there going, well, I'll not tell you what I'm saying, because really it's not. Can't be broadcast. It's not repeatable. But I think, well, okay, that's just such a classic example of dodgy data, isn't it? It's like, yes, that's factually correct, but what's also correct is that more people didn't vote for Boris Johnson.
Of course, exactly.
And, that's what an election is. I mean, unless you have something that's much more proportional, then more people didn't vote for Johnson. But this guy, who was at one of the Johnson's cabinet actually, the chap who's the treasurer, assistant to the treasury, was saying, well, that means that we just don't need to bother listening to the SNP because more people didn't vote for them, voted against them.
Well, the thing that gets me is that every time the unionists put up a goalpost for us to achieve, and say, if you get that, that would be a mandate. When we achieve it, they pick another one. For example, way back, before even I was born, this guy called John McCormick got a petition going, National Covenant it was called, with well over 1 million signatures. I can't remember whether it was between 1 and 2 million signatures. It was practically all the voting public in Scotland wanting a parliament, a devolved parliament basically was what he was wanting. And, nothing happened. I handed that in, nothing happened. Shoot forward to Thatcher. Thatcher said what they have to do. This was at the point when the SNP had just a wee handful of MPs. She said if they want independence, they have to get 36 MPs, which was at that point 50% of the MPs in Westminster, in Scottish MPs. They have to get 36 MPs, 50% of the MPs in the Parliament, and then they'll have a mandate for independence. And of course, she only said that because at that point it looked like the SNP would never get that. Now we're getting it routinely. And again, they've said, no, now you have to get... Now, if we did get over 50% of the population in Scotland, you can be sure they'll say you can't get it until every single person in Scotland of voting age votes for the SNP or votes yes.
It's ridiculous.
They will always shift the goalposts as soon as we achieve it, and we achieve these mandates again and again.
And then there was the similar one in the 1970 referendum to have the Parliament reinstated.
Yes,
we voted
yes.
for it, and then that was...
yes.
Goalpost change again, wasn't it? Because there wasn't
That's
60%.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
And in those days, people forget, but in 1979, at the time, they said it was basically, in effect, if you were not voting, then you were voting no, because they counted, it went by turnout. They actually had used an old register, and they forbade postal votes unless you were being sent away for your work. You couldn't postally vote because you were sick or because you were on holiday or something.
So coming back into the present, I mean, how did you... I was at home and on election night, 10 o'clock, you get the exit poll. I mean, the exit poll, I just went, oh, God, no, shoot, let's hope that's wrong.
Yes.
I mean, I just couldn't believe it, because I thought we were, there was a chance that there would be a minority Labour government. How are you feeling yourself about this?
It's so basically so schizophrenic about it. Obviously delighted that the SNP got 55 seats, which gives us a moral mandate. But the fact that we couldn't get in tow with Jeremy Corbyn, this great plan that was going about a hung parliament and everything, it means that we don't have a legal or political mandate within the UK context. It's difficult to know where we go from here.
Yeah.
I mean, they're talking about taking it through the law courts, but the UK doesn't have a written constitution, so where is your legal basis for all this?
Yeah.
We have a moral basis, we have a political basis within Scotland. It all comes down to what the proclaimers say in their record. What do you do when minority means you? What do you do when democracy fails you?
What a good point, Mary. And so have the Pensioners for Indy got any big aims coming up in the new year then as part of the campaign, or just more of the same fantastic stuff, really? I know you just...
Well, we do stalls all over the place.
Can I just say, for those that are listening in, that Mary and Sheena are with a team of helpers, are great. They do a brilliant street stall most Thursday.
All Thursdays?
Yeah, all Thursdays. Although it's stopped now for Christmas, isn't
Only
it?
for 3 weeks.
And then after the new year. So if you want to come along, say hi, or even help out with that stall, it's at the bottom of Miller Street, just near Primark, isn't it?
In Argyll Street.
In Argyll Street, right on Argyll Street,
Yeah.
in the pedestrian part. And that's every week from 12 till 2, isn't it? And also... Marlene, did you want to say
I was just going
else?
to add in, I think we've just thought the same thing again. I was just going to add in, and there's also one that happens out in Milngavie.
Yeah.
We're not there every Friday, but we're there every other Friday. Some of us go up there, and that's dead interesting as well, actually. I haven't done much in the way of being on stalls, and it's a bit of a learning curve, but it's great doing it.
And I know Edinburgh and the Lothian's Pensioners for Indy group do a lot of pop-up stalls in various parts of the Lothian.
Excellent.
Every week.
What we'll do as well, and there are regular meetings, so if anybody out there wants to be added to the mailing list, then they should just go onto the Facebook page or the website for Pensioners for Independence.
Not the Facebook page, the website.
The website's the
and you
best
can
one.
add your name and address,
and then
your email address.
There's no
Thanks
membership
for that, Marlene.
fee, you just give us your email.
We'd just like to say thanks very much, and on behalf of everybody out there, folk like yourself, I don't know if you ever get as much thanks as you deserve, because you really work full time for the Yes and Indy cause, in terms of like all the stuff you do for Pensioners for Indy, for the SNP, and I hope you realise that folk really do appreciate it, because you are absolutely I salute your indefatigability, Mary.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly better fun than working.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
Indie Life Radio.